Hello and welcome to the SEO Unplugged podcast. I'm your host, Itamar Blauer. Today, I'm joined with Fabrizio Ballarini, who is the head of organic growth at Revolut. Fabrizio, how are you?
Hello, hi, Itamar. Thanks for having me. Good, thank you.
Good to see you, and thank you very much for taking the time. Today, we're talking about enterprise SEO, which is a big topic, as the name suggests, enterprise. And I think, first and foremost, it's a kind of name that it gets thrown around in the industry. And what I feel is that many people don't really understand specifically what enterprise actually means in the context of SEO. So can you just give us a brief introduction in terms of what does the word enterprise mean when it comes to SEO? What types of companies? What does it involve from your perspective and your experience?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, obviously this is my experience. I assume that some people might have a slightly different view, but I think, to be honest, maybe the at time unclarity depends also pretty much on the company and their structure. Just now it came to my mind that almost 15 years ago, when we were consulting for HSBC and a very large enterprise client through agency. That was called enterprise, and probably because the size of those clients and the size of the operation was such that was different from having a single SEO team. There were teams in multiple locations. There were teams that were interfacing both centrally as well as by product line with different stakeholders. So I think that ultimately and then through my experience in the last few years at Wise, where we were not such a big company early days, but then eventually it got to a sizable operation doing SEO across multiple domains and on a very large portal. I think it ultimately boiled down to the complexity of interaction with the stakeholders and the program itself, right? So there are companies that could be easily in the top list of companies out there that maybe don't have such a developed program when it comes to SEO. Could be down to multiple reasons. Either there's lack of investment, or maybe it's not the right channel for them, but it doesn't always match. My point is that it doesn't always match the size of the company and the stage at which the company is at. I've seen company of Series C to close to IPO startup that start developing larger programs, right? With a lot of stream of work, with a lot of initiatives both centrally and regionally. So I think that's ultimately my definition is around the complexity of the program, how many teams there are, and how many stakeholders across the business get involved into that. What is not enterprise, in my view, is and even though some of these teams that are doing amazing, right? What is not enterprise is teams that are relatively small, a handful of people team, and they just work on a domain that maybe operates just in one region, that is selling just a couple of product lines, as opposed to having a more complex portfolio of customer acquisition. This generally needs a slightly different approach, in the sense that it's not that you have to deal with a lot of markets. It's not that you have to deal with a lot of subdivision within your company, but you just operate pretty much SEO on some categories of your website, and that's it. I think ultimately it also boils down to how much the team is willing to make this serious, right? My experience is that throughout the years, with the work that I've done, we could have gotten at least 10 times less serious about SEO, in the sense that we could have taken the core landing pages of the website. We could have said to the business, hey, we do SEO on this set of landing pages. We're not gonna build anything else. We're not gonna try to build acquisition products. We're not gonna try to expand our content to an extreme in terms of long tail traffic. Or we could have not managed a portfolio of domains together with the main domain. So there are ways that each team can make their life more complex and structured, and often that boils down to the ambition as well. I think what is probably not ideal is when the word enterprise is associated to a lot of bureaucracy and and processes that don't go anywhere. But then there are also situations where actually the operation around SEO aren't as simple, right? So, for instance, in my past role, like we got to the point where within the company we had at least 4 to 5 head of department level people running different SEO team. We were doing this on multiple domain as opposed to the main domain only. So it got to a point where the program was a bit more developed, right? Than just and often when you do that, one thing that maybe is common even in a more let's say like bureaucratic and more complex organization is that at some point there is the need for a central team that keeps a bit an eye on what the units do, and this is like purely from an efficiency perspective, but also to regulate a bit what's happening, right? It's very easy that one section of the website compete with the other. It's very easy that one market domain compete with another domain that is still our domain or is a partner domain. So I think eventually, most of the times, I think there is the need at some point to have a central group of people that define a little bit the rule, define a little bit the tooling, heavily define the tooling so that we don't end up with like 95 different tools for the same exact purpose, right? So often, like, this tends to be something that is common in larger organization doing SEO. If this is done for the right purposes, as I said, to centralize platforms doing that kind of work, I think is healthy no matter the environment, right? Even in my 15 years ago example of HSBC as consulting there, the purpose of the central team was basically to audit platforms and their CMS and try to standardize this so that we could release faster across the markets with the same platform, right? And not having a platform in one market being so outdated from another. So in that case, even in a setup that was quite plastic from a agility perspective, it was still a good initiative, right? To try to make things smooth and scale, given that the size of the org was quite big. I think that's my experience. Would be curious to know from you as well. Like, how would you define this a bit further, or if you have question, happy to deep dive on each of these.
It's quite rare that I get the question thrown back at me on these episodes, so that's quite a refreshing, quite a refreshing take right now. But I think from my side, a lot of what you said is something that I agree with, and I think people listening out there, especially if they've been in these situations, they will sort of be nodding their heads as they're watching or listening to this. And I think a lot of things on an enterprise level really relates to scale, efficiency, and just being able to make sure that you have a core product, you have a core brand, you have a core company in terms of your identity and what you stand for and what you do. And I think a lot of the unification of that is where at an enterprise level you're looking at the complexity of different systems, like you sort of said, and making sure that everything kind of gels together to the point where the business doesn't have to basically be spending lots of cash unnecessarily, because I think that's always going to be a question in the back of the minds of a CFO, sort of checking to see, well, how much are we actually spending across the, I guess, core web operations of the business. So a lot of what you say, I would sort of like agree, and just to try and bundle that together in terms of just the unification of things in a general sense. You mentioned tooling, which is quite interesting, that I want to get into in a moment. But before I do that, what is the kind of day-to-day work look like? Just the average day from somebody working in an SEO team as part of like a big enterprise? Because I imagine it may be quite different from a lot of experiences that other SEOs have, maybe in smaller companies. But just to give people a taste or a glimpse of perspective in terms of what the day-to-day activities look like. Is it lots of meetings? So you mentioned, like, in some cases there can be or might not be as much bureaucracy, but what does sort of day-to-day look like in enterprise SEO from your experience?
Yeah, I think it's a good question, actually. In my past experience, I ended up trying it all, in the sense that I started as a band of one as doing SEO, and then we ended up with like multiple teams in multiple location, and then I think at that point my role changed quite a bit, in the sense that I was actually craving to do some actual work on particular deliveries and technical work, but most of my time, as you said, was spent with either with stakeholders in the market and in product lines, and sometimes fixing problems that were impacting us, that were not taken seriously enough, or other teams didn't have bandwidth, right? For example, one thing that one of my teams at Wise used to do is run a price comparison data, and this wasn't necessarily our job as a SEO, right? In the sense that we had a product for money transfer, and we basically, our job was to basically build those pages, those landing pages, and drive traffic to this product line. One thing that we realized, though, is that the customers that want to transfer money, often they don't know what they're being charged, and they like to compare prices with other providers. And this is exactly where, like multiple of my quarters worth of work were dedicated just to this, in the sense that I said, okay, fine. The central product team is a little bit less engaged on this topic than they should be. We tried to initially get each region and market to self-serve, in the sense that we built like a platform where people could contribute and say, okay, I am the person working on the Singapore market, I will collect the data and I will help you with the Singapore market price comparison. But that didn't work, so we said, okay, let's centralize that. And ultimately, we ended up trying to solve this problem, because this was helping SEO in the first place, right? We knew that the customer landing on this type of pages were converting so much better and were performing better if they were seeing price comparison data. So this is an example of how you initially are probably in meetings with someone sitting on the other side, where you basically discuss a topic that is relevant to you, both of you, and then the ideal scenario is where you do something about it, in the sense that if you just have meetings around the problem and none of the two fix the problem remains unsolved. If you take the initiatives, or you obviously not everything you can do yourself, right? You have the ability to validate the business case to the other person on the other side. You can probably achieve more just by cooperating in one area. And I think this is just one example, right? It could happen with many regions. It could happen. So most of the time was spent on this topic, right? Less than day-to-day, hands-on SEO at this stage. Also because later down the line, there were a lot of very strong SEO people in the business, right? Some of them probably better than me. That were taking care of day-to-day operation, but then I think the same could apply to to other roles in the team. There were people that, for instance, were just dedicated to guild work, right? So they were not working on a particular product line. They were not working on a particular market, but they were just doing tooling, or they were just doing a particular development of the platform, because it made sense to not have every single person to do, as you said earlier, right? It's not just a money problem. It's also a speed efficiency problem, right? Like I think many times organization, they end up throwing money sometimes. It's not that everyone has got free money, but eventually the money can come. Is more the fact that if you really want to be fast, you probably want to dedicate people that their day-to-day is not to do any delivery that will impact this quarter in terms of performance of the website, but they do, platform work that it is going to help everyone in the coming quarter, right? So these are very hard to estimate sometimes because you're blocking someone time and you don't show to the business revenue coming back at the immediate term, right? Or sometimes it's hard to quantify time saving, or it's hard to quantify speed improvement. But I think that there is an healthy balance there to have. The advantage of SEO, if any kind of program is up and running, is that from a financial perspective, it's generally a better investment than running ads on Google, Meta, and so on. It's better than doing other marketing activities in terms of like payback on that investment. So usually, from experience, the SEO teams, if they get to the point where the things are up and running, they have some bandwidth to like not deliver, because technically you could go on holiday and this month the website is there anyway to deliver some growth. Then obviously don't go on holiday for too long, because things might go very south, right? But like in general, like what you do in the month doesn't necessarily translate to revenue in the month. So you have a little bit of that lag to play with and say, okay, actually I'm going to take a step back from delivering revenue this very month, but I will improve something that will make us a bit faster in the coming months. So I think it varies on where people sit in the organization doing enterprise SEO, but I think that definitely there are certain roles that would not exist in another org, where either the organization is quite small, so you can literally go without caring about the rest of the company, or you basically don't have the complexity from like a product standpoint. And another thing is that I've been working in finance for a while, and we have all the regulation and compliance, and there are certain aspects that come into the picture, right? Like that we have to consider, as opposed to maybe other industries that are a bit easier from that standpoint. But I think that in any industry, pretty much there are certain, either on the brand side or on the legal side, there are certain consideration to have that the bigger the organization gets, the more they require time. Like even from a legal standpoint, I spent quite a lot of time dealing with domain portfolio, with like various IP disputes that we had throughout the years, just because eventually, when you're like a minuscule company, you're not a big target. When you're a larger company, there's more likely that someone will have something that they disagree with you, and I think these are important because like I understand that these are not classic SEO problems, right? But if all in a sudden we cannot write content about one topic because we had some legal challenges from another company, this impacts our performance, right? Because we're not going to be able to perform for this type of product and this type of content. So I think sometimes it's not like an SEO problem, right? From like, it's not something that you would hear at an SEO conference in terms of, hey, I solved this technical issue. But it's a problem, because if you don't do that, then none of the other magic happens, right? So it is equally important at some point. So I think that's what I was ending up spending most of my time in the last few years. From some aspect is very interesting, because it's not that every day you do this by doing SEO. Sometimes it can get a bit boring, because you're a little bit like craving. At least personally, I crave to have some action in doing stuff. But then sometimes when you have wins in other areas that are connected to what you do, these are wins for the teams, because then they can fly on what they are good at, and then I think it's positive time. So I think that is, I don't see it as a boring thing that I have to do, like doing expenses or or something that I generally don't enjoy, if that makes sense.
Yeah, for sure. And I guess it means it is really a mixed bag. Like you'll have times where you'll be working through different types of areas of the business, or dealing with different types of stakeholders, different projects. So it can really be, you can be sort of stretched in many different ways, I would say, as part of that team. Now, I want to get onto the tooling conversation, because I think this is where it gets quite interesting for two reasons. The first one is that there are SEO tools that are well known in the industry, which do have enterprise grade solutions, and they'll sort of use the term enterprise very deliberately. So there's this part of the question, which is essentially what sorts of tools do you use, and are they typically enterprise level tools? And if they are, then what sort of benefits, or how do you kind of evaluate those tools? And then the second part of the question is around the conversation with AI, and how do you utilize AI within enterprise SEO? So those sort of like a two-part question, which would be great to get your perspective on.
Yeah. Let's answer the tooling first, because I think it can lead to the second. So on the tooling, I think that this naming probably comes pretty much from the past. What I mean by that is something that probably the tools landscape has inherited, because in the past, take all the Fortune 500 company, they most likely were working with an agency. This was like 10 plus years ago, right? Like most likely working with an agency, most likely not building their own tooling in any shape, right? Unless they were really deep into SEO, and therefore they needed tooling that multiple people could collaborate on. They needed tooling that were probably a bit more sophisticated than the off-the-shelf package that you would buy, and this probably led to all the enterprise tooling that you see today, or that we have seen throughout the years, that some of them come and go. I think though that personally, I think that there are two versions in my mind. One is enterprise tooling for an enterprise company, but that hasn't got an enterprise SEO team. What I mean by that is, so if the company is large enough, it is a large company, and they have a complex structure, but they don't have like a hyper serious investment in a large SEO team, I think the naming perfectly makes sense, right? Because the tool provider is patching basically the ability of the SEO team to meet the scale of the company. The other scenario is that if the company is very serious at SEO and has got a lot of resources internally, especially engineers and technical resources, and sometimes also from a privacy data perspective, struggle to basically connect the data externally to vendors, this is where maybe the enterprise tool fit a little bit less, even though the company is very large and they have a very large enterprise team. This is because the team generally has got the resources to build some tooling. It doesn't mean that they don't work with the same provider, right? They maybe buy the same data with API, they maybe consume like a certain suite in the same way, but it's different from like ending the entire processes to an enterprise tool. Is often like a little bit of a monster of a mix of tools that connect a little bit with the internal platform, partially is sitting outside the perimeter of the data of the company, and so on. So I think that these are probably the two scenarios, and I think it only boils down to the commitment of the team and the technical resources of the team to build tooling, right? In my past experience, we were at the scale of doing enterprise SEO, but we didn't use enterprise tooling because we stitch things together our own. It depends. I think it depends on the company setup, on what the stage where they're at, and so on. And I think the same applies to LLM. First of all, LLM, similar topic of data and privacy. The bigger the companies are, the more the restrictions on usage of LLM, and data becomes, and AI becomes strict, right? I would be surprised if any tech company out there, is allowing people to rock up a ChatGPT paid subscription and good luck connected with our data, and that's it, right? So it might be the case, but generally I think this is going towards like a scenario where company, at least in tech, right? Like maybe there are companies that are not in tech that will not do that, but companies that are tech companies generally have a machine learning team, generally have a team that works on these environments. Therefore, again, the limitation on working with LLM tools is sometimes a bit more than what you would have in yourself doing a project on the weekend, right? But then at the same time, the potential is great. I'm still, I'm very bullish on that, regardless of the setup that people use. I'm bullish on the aspect of using LLMs to do SEO. I'm a bit less bullish on the immediate need to know the visibility in LLMs. Like, even though anyone is investing in that, and everyone is doing that, and I'm not saying that I'm not either, but it's the aspect of like using LLMs to power processes and initiatives in the team, building agents that perform tasks and do activity at scale. And obviously depending on the technical setup of the company, right? Like, so, do you have a proprietary CMS? Do you have certain internal platforms that you use? This varies the way that you use tooling, right? Like, and you use the various application. I think that, and that's why I think that probably there will be two scenarios, right? There will be similar to the topic of enterprise or not tooling. There will be companies that will end up cooking a lot of LLM agents themselves because eventually they have technical resources to do that. They will continue to work with providers with data, right? And to acquire data and to enrich whatever they're building with data. And then there are companies that will delegate that part of the tooling building to the vendor, which I think that they have good ability to be very good with LLMs because the speed at which they could iterate, even on the flexibility that they give to the clients, is quite wide, as opposed to in the past, if you were buying a set of screens with a couple of tasks attached, that's what you're buying, right? As opposed to now that you could literally build your own workflows inside the tool and so on. So I think that is great, even in a scenario that someone doesn't own the infrastructure of the various LLM agent, but they are buying this from a tool. So I think that, very exciting time, to be honest. We'll see what happens with the user. The reason why I'm more interested in leveraging LLMs for building the web than seeing what happens after I do it is simply because the user behavior is going to change a lot across the usage of LLMs and all these chat assistant. The way that these LLMs are working is changing day by day, right? So in the past, if you were settling on your share of voice report because you knew that you had this click-through rate on these on these search results, pretty much you could live with that thing for the next 15, 20 months at least. Now, I think that what you see today might not be the same tomorrow, right? So there's a lot of moving parts in that, both from what the models do, right? Like, so, are they just doing retrieval with Google? Do they have their own discovery? Do they use Reddit more or less? Do they, so all these questions are a bit up in the air, I think, still, or they're too volatile, right, to be very committed to it. And second is we don't know what the customers are going to do, which is probably the most important part, right? Like, my father still doesn't know what ChatGPT is, right? And is a user of the internet. And so we need to figure out a little bit how certain use cases move. And when I give this example of my father, it's not because, I think that people will not adopt it if only the new generation are using all the LLM assistant very, very heavily. It's just about what they do with it, right? And what activities they do. It might be that in planning a trip with your friends, you are fully committed to delegating these initiatives to LLM. It might be that dealing with your money on your own bank account, you are less likely to do certain activity with the LLM. Or if you do that, then you're still going to rely on the experience that your provider gives you, right? So probably there will be a scenario where the user is going to interact on ChatGPT or any of the Gemini and so on, but it could be the scenario where the user kind of does the same task on the website, on the app of the provider, right? There's no reason why, I don't know, Expedia or Booking.com couldn't give you the same trip planning experience plus their own data, which is quite gigantic, on their properties, right? Like, and if I am an Expedia and a Booking.com customer, why do I need to Google? In the same way, I don't shop Amazon items on Google. I just open the Amazon app and I get what I need. So I think we'll see how the customers behave, right? I don't think right now we're just trying to translate the classic 10 blue link ranking to LLM visibility. I think that, it has got a role, right? Because I think there's a lot of interesting data around that. But then, like, there's a little bit less practical action on the back of knowing that, at least for now, right? The only area where I think is interesting is that if in the past being the top result on a SERP was basically winning you market share, right? Pretty much. Now it could be that you're not necessarily the top result, but you have helped you're still the customer in some way, right? So like many years ago, I knew a guy that was working on buy gold type of website, right? The relatively shady initiatives, and if you were the first website on the buying gold result, you were selling gold. If you were the second or website, you were selling less gold, but there was nothing that the customers was engaging with you, as opposed to now that think about choosing a banking provider. You might not be the first website, you might not be the first, the customer might actually be searching something that is not even related to you, might be searching something about your competitor, but maybe one of your articles have given an answer for a problem that they have with regards to someone, and this could be featured there, and this could be what moves their decision making. It's just that the interaction got more complex, right? It's not about, oh, let me click on proportionally on the first to the bottom, but they're actually having a more engaged conversation there with the with the results. So I think that is what probably will change some of the activities that we will do. Some companies were doing this already. For instance, at Wise, we used to do price comparison even before there was a LLM. Now, thanks to that, LLM will have data to actually compare the cost of a transfer with other provider. But I think that is it depends, right? Like, I think each industry will have their own rule, right? And I think that ultimately transparency will help all providers, right? I'm seeing now, even in my current role, why across many vertical of banking that Revolut is covering, exposing information to customers to make choices, given that the product is very competitive, is generally helping, right? So helping the customer generally helps. So saying the right things and sharing, transparent information generally does the job, right? From that standpoint. So so I think that we'll continue to do this job of exposing information so that the customer can make a choice, right? That one I don't think is going to change. How the customer will interact with that's what is up for grab. I don't know. I don't want to put bet my money on it yet. I think is a bit early in some area, even though we have seen gigantic changes in the industry, but practically it might be a bit early in some area to have a definitive answer, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and you mentioned before there's lots of moving parts. There's loads of variables in place. So at this moment in time, as of when we're recording this, who really knows for sure how adoption is going to go, what's going to happen? I think the best barometer at the moment is to understand how people trust AI is if they let the LLM bypass all of the permissions when they're going through stuff on their computer. I think that currently is the best way to know if somebody's as risk averse or not when it comes to this tech. But let's get back to the enterprise SEO side of things in a way that I want to sort of wrap up the episode, which is potentially a question that people have if they're in smaller teams or they're sort of considering working for enterprise type businesses, what is the best piece of advice you could give to somebody if they're interested in working in SEO in a more sort of enterprise level?
Mhm. Yeah, I think that more than before, and maybe that's where LLM is helping. More people are knocking at the door of the SEO teams, trying to understand why ChatGPT and other models are saying the things that they are saying. And this is a good opportunity to engage with them on the why and like the knowledge that we have, but also to go deeper with building connection with various teams, right? Like, and they, often like the main difference, as we discussed before, comes on the fact that you're not just compartmentalizing SEO to a set of activities and, hey, we got HR flank right this month, good luck for the future, but you're going a little bit step forward in working with various team, like a few levels down beyond what is the classic SEO, which means that you kind of have SEO covered from a kind of best practice standpoint, but actually what is missing is the other part that will make you win, right? Like if your product is not competitive, if your landing experience is not compelling, you still have a problem despite you ticking the box in SEO across the activity. So I think this is like great time to do that, and whether you do it in a company that hasn't got very large established team yet, or whether you join a company that already has got this, I think the same applies, right? It's just about a little bit curiosity, a little bit being open to the fact that is this problem cannot be solved just in a isolated way, and by working with various people, you have to achieve that. The difficulty comes from how you interact with people, how you have shared KPIs, and how you basically build commitment from people. My best advice is try to get to the point where it's obvious that we have to do it, because we have done so much legwork and research that this is proven to be a good idea. We have the right data and so on. Sometimes with trust over time, some of this can be bypassed a little bit, in the sense that if your part of the organization got it right many times, there's a good chance that the business will be willing to bet again on certain initiatives. But I think that in general, we should be still in a scenario where data can help us making the argument and having a meaningful conversation, because the day we try to approach the same problem without is the day that we will be struggling a little bit in basically carrying on activity, measure them later, and justify more of it. So I think that's always going to be the case.
Amazing. Fabrizio, thank you so much. Where can people, as the last bit, where can people find you if they've got any questions or they're curious, or just to follow the work that you're doing?
The usual LinkedIn and X. Like X is a bit less active these days, but there's been a bit of an exodus from X in terms of SEO community. LinkedIn is probably the most active place where people can find me, or otherwise sometimes at conferences I try to attend as much as possible, yet I'm busy, so sometimes you don't see me in person. But generally on LinkedIn is the best way to reach out, connect, and exchange, discussions.
Awesome. Fabrizio, thank you so much for your time today. It was a great conversation. Thank you as well to everyone listening and watching out there. And as always, we will see you in the next episode.